Welcome to the Installation Art Podcast, the world's #1 and only podcast about installation art and the people who work with it. I am your host, Anastasia Parmson, and today I'm back with a little bonus episode. One of our longtime listeners actually suggested a topic for this one, saying that maybe I should talk about what installation art actually is, especially in the context of this show. So in this episode, I'll try to share my personal interpretation that reflects what I'm looking for when I am researching guests for the show and how I navigate the blurry lines between what is and isn't installation. This is obviously a very subjective topic, so if you don't agree, don't get mad at me, just get in touch and give your point of view. I'll tell you at the end how you can do that. Before I dive into this episode, I want to share something. I recently received a really lovely message from a new listener. It said, "Hi, I just found the podcast. This is truly something I was looking for. Went through 2 episodes so far. Very inspiring. Thanks for your work." That is so great to hear. Thank you so much. I always love to hear from you guys because I am just here alone speaking into a microphone in my makeshift temporary holiday studio. So it's great to get some feedback, get some listener messages. Again, I'll tell you at the end how you can get in touch. So let's talk about what is installation art. For me, installation art is deeply rooted in architecture in terms of the spatial thinking, and in theater and performance arts in terms of ways to occupy a space. I thought maybe before I start talking about what I look for or what I think defines installation art, I thought the best way to start to dive into this topic would be to talk about a brief history, just a few minutes of going back in time and looking at how we got to even having a contemporary art medium that we call installation art. The first installation artist is arguably Marcel Duchamp, starting with the use of ready-made and bicycle wheel originally conceived in 1913. Today, it wouldn't be something considered installation. But back then, it was kind of revolutionary, right? Then in 1927, Duchamp created Porte 11 Rue Larrey, door 11, which was hinged between 2 frames in a corner, a single door between 2 frames in a way that the door was simultaneously always open and always closed. Now, that's definitely an art installation, am I right? In fact, I really like this idea, and I do like to do doors in my own installations, so I might steal this one. Duchamp also made the 1200 coal sacks. As the title suggests, 1200 coal sacks hung up in the ceiling, suspended from the ceiling, at International Exhibition of Surrealism in Galerie Beaux-Arts in Paris, 1938. Absolutely an installation. At the same time, around the 20s, early 30s, Kurt Schwitters was constructing his Merzbau in his own house in Hanover. For those of you listening on YouTube, I'll try to put pictures of everything so you can see. Otherwise, Google it. Kurt Schwitters' Merzbau. He kept it kind of secret for somebody who really liked public attention. It was interesting that he did that. And it really looked like some kind of a surrealist abstract, geometric shape room installation. And that work potentially served as an important reference for Joseph Beuys in the 60s. Next, we have Le Vide, The Empty, by Yves Klein, his 1958 exhibition at Iris Clert Gallery in Paris. That exhibition consisted of nothing, just an empty gallery space. You could say that it's more minimalist than minimalism. In fact, I think it predates any exhibited work by the minimalists. But we could say that this kind of work rests on the back of Duchamp again with Air de Paris, Air of Paris, the glass vial from 1919, supposedly containing Parisian air. Shortly after that comes along Armand with his poubelle, which is rubbish bins in French. Armand would make artworks that were the contents of rubbish bins displayed in a glass box, like a vitrine. So when Armand had his own exhibition opportunity at Clert Gallery in 1960, 2 years after Klein, as a nod to Klein's Le Vide, Armand dumped 2 truckloads of rubbish inside the gallery and called the exhibition Le Plein, which means full or filled up. Now, I can't imagine that Iris Clert Gallery was very happy about this. I don't know. Also makes me wonder what kind of cattiness and art world gossip and intrigue was going on behind there, because it sounds like there's a story there, like some kind of personal inside jokes, relationships, rivalry. It would be interesting to know what that was all about. Now, assemblage or accumulation of objects is certainly one of the earlier manifestations of moving toward installation art. For example, around that same time, we have Daniel Spoeri's snare pictures or tableau piège, wall-mounted tabletops covered with a tablecloth or with all the leftover meals, dishes, cigarette butts that you would expect after a happy gathering, let's say at a bistro or at home. Another example of assemblage could be Barry Leva's distributed sculptures, which were floor arrangements of colored felt and other colored objects, kind of, I guess, as a contrast or a response to the minimalists. He would scatter things around, or maybe he would place them in a way that looks scattered. And of course, let's not forget Christo and Jean-Claude, who started by stacking oil barrels in 1958, and then they wrapped the oil barrels, and then they wrapped more things and bigger things and buildings, up until wrapping 2.4 kilometers of Australian coastline, and so on. The rest is history. And then in the 70s, land art and the concept of site specificity takes hold for certain artists. Smithson, for example, articulated his work and interest in the site as a desire to, quote, return to the origins of material. And site for him wasn't only the environment of a place, but also the historic and archaeological context. So the idea of site specificity as a practice of encompassing the history, the connotations, the culture of a place where art is made or where it's exhibited, potentially started with land artists, and then that idea moved back into the gallery space and into the white cube spaces, where it really takes off as a recognized vital part of contemporary art and expression. So that was like a brief history from the early 1900s moving into contemporary art, just pinpointed with a few examples of early precursors of installation art. So what is installation art for the purposes of this podcast? For me, it is most easily defined as multiple elements interacting with each other and or with the space in which they are displayed. Installation art is not something you can easily hang on any wall or place on a plinth just anywhere. There is, as we already saw, accumulation, assemblage, there's tension and context, intervention, or my favorite word, détournement, which is a word I also used in episode 13, where I was reporting from the Venice Art Biennale, trying to explain how it relates to what I saw and the kind of installations that really spoke to me at the Biennale exhibition. I've been reading this book called Installation Art by Nicholas de Oliveira, Nicola Oxley, and Michael Petrie, where I was surprised and delighted to find mention of détournement in the context of what defines contemporary installation. And I want to share it with you because I feel validated. According to the authors, détournement is, quote, the appropriation of previously existing aesthetic artifacts in order to divert their meaning or intent, end quote. I think that's a perfect academic explanation of something I couldn't quite put into words myself. So basically, taking something that already existed in a context and changing it in some way, diverting the meaning or intent. That's definitely, for me personally, an important part of what makes good installation art. Also, for me personally, a sense of scale is important when it comes to installation. It's hard to think of examples of installation art that are smaller than the human scale. There's something about the physicality that transforms an artwork's relationship to the space and to the viewer. Say, if you put a cluster of miniature house sculptures on the gallery floor, is that installation? Now, blow those houses up to almost human scale, or maybe even bigger. Installation imposes itself on the space and on the viewer's body. It has an impending presence. That said, if you made a hole in the gallery floor or walls and built the miniature houses into the hole like a concealed world blending with its environment, I would say that's installation. So that brings me to the most important and easy to spot characteristic of installation art, and that is site specificity. Works that aren't merely placed in any room, but are somehow linked to the space that they occupy. They are in a dialogue with the site, and sometimes they are defined by or even created by the site. That can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be super elaborate, researched. It could be the dimensions of the space, its characteristics, the materials used in the building. For example, the way my previous guest, Emma Fielden, used the steel beams to create a magnetic installation. It could be the cultural or historical or political significance of the venue. It could be the events that have previously taken place at the site, and so on. In that sense, I dare say that the majority of installation art is in some way site-specific today. Can one single sculpture be considered installation? Of course, the boundaries are very blurry and super subjective. I think the context in this case is everything. Not just the immediate context of the work in the space, but also the context of the overall body of work of the artist. When I look at the fabric sculptures by Doho Sa, it can be one piece representing a room or an element of a room, and in my mind, that's installation. Not only because the work creates a space within a space, but also because I am inevitably aware of his other installation works that automatically make each individual work seem as a support for the overall ongoing body of work of the artist. Or I look at the curved shapes of Nika Nilova's sculptures made from salvaged staircase handrails, leaning precariously on the walls of an exhibition space. To me, that looks like installation and not just one sculpture placed in any space. And I think it's the leaning, that dependence on the architecture that houses the work, but also, again, the scale. As she was describing in episode 11, she needs to be hyper aware of the openings in the exhibition space and whether her works can be brought in at all. And if you go look at the images of her work, these leaning railings have been exhibited in some very special venues. They're not plain white box galleries. They're historic sites with unique features that interact with Nilova's work. Those pieces may not be site-specific, but they look like they could be. Is that just good curation, or is that installation? I feel like I'm only just brushing the surface of the tip of this iceberg. I can't even begin to cover things like light art, sound art, which I think are almost by definition instantly installations, but I guess it depends case by case how it's done. And then we have video art. That's a whole different ballgame. Is a video projected on a wall or on a rectangular screen installation? For me, I'd say probably not. But add in some elements that are linked to the video in some way into the space. For example, video artists like Korakrit, Arnon Chai, or Pipola Wrist, who create an atmosphere. They lay down carpets and cushions. They project the video on the ceiling. They design the environment in which the video is to be experienced. And boom, installation. Or look at the work of Nicholas Rupsich, my guest from episode 12. He arranges different sized screens leaning onto the wall and overlapping each other. Or he suspends one corner of the screen off the floor. And again, that's installation. There is a lot more to be said about that in terms of video installation. It's too much to go into today in this short bonus episode. But again, love to hear your thoughts on that and your experiences or pet peeves. Let me know. Then, of course, there's public art and architectural interventions, which by their nature, their placement, context, complexity, pretty much always qualify as installation, like it or not. But what about wall art? What about murals? That's a little complicated, isn't it? I don't really know the answer, to be honest. For me, it depends on the work and the space. For example, if you look at Barbara Kruger's work, she covers the walls, the ceilings, the floor, and now we can definitely say, yep, that's installation art. I mentioned the notion of assemblage or accumulation earlier. I think this is an important tool in the arsenal of installation art. If we take one small clay figure, it's just a clay figure, but put 35,000 of them, covering every inch of a gallery room to a point where you can't even walk into the room, the way Anthony Gromley did with Field in 1991 at the Salvatore Ala Gallery in New York. And now it's a completely different story. Same with the Sunflowers by Ai Weiwei, the Candy by Felix Gonzalez Torres, the Pollen by Wolfgang Leib. The examples are too many to count. Accumulation is very common in installation art. In fact, it is something that's been used by several of my previous guests when making their installations. Take the Library of Books by Dennis Farkas, the Ribbons of Ann Patterson, the Buckets of Jason Peters, the Sponges by Olga Law. I could keep going. There's just something striking and special about the idea of repetition and accumulation of the same object or the same material to a point where it's overwhelming a space. Now, I know I must have forgotten something, but it's time to wrap up this experimental bonus episode about trying to put my finger on what is installation art from my very subjective and unacademic point of view. I know I just barely touched the basics of it. There are so many more questions and examples. So now I'm asking you, did I get something wrong? Did I leave out something crucial? You can tell me in a voice message at speakpipe.com/installationartpodcast. Or if you prefer typing, send me an email. It's anastasia@installationartpodcast.com. Your message might even be featured in a future episode. I will put some images of the works I've mentioned in the YouTube version of this episode. I will also put links to everything I talked about in the show notes, including the voice message page. This concludes our special holiday bonus episode. I hope you've had peaceful and happy holidays, and I hope you have a great start to the new year. We have some really exciting things coming up in 2025. So make sure to follow wherever you're listening so you don't miss the upcoming episodes. Or if you want to get the new episodes delivered straight to your inbox, go subscribe to our newsletter on installationartpodcast.com. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.